Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Knowledge and Networking Breakfast series, and one of our 2 yearly breakfast member marathons, where we introduce new members, or they introduce themselves actually, and we network with each other and celebrate LSO's membership. LSO, as you know, is a member-driven organization, and by member-driven, I don't just mean the support that you all very generously give, but also that we're there to represent you and your issues across the full spectrum of life sciences. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that today, but you know where to find us. Please feel free to contact us anytime if there's issues that you are interested in. So welcome to what is absolutely a glorious day. I know you're all probably inside on this webinar, but if not, enjoy the sunshine. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. I'm not going to say a lot. You've all got a little summary of what they're going to do, but they're going to explain to you about their company and what they do. And so the first speaker today is Liam, and Liam comes from Berkeley, Canada. So I'll give the floor to Liam.
Thank you, Allison, and good morning, everyone. My name is Liam Brown. I head up the Life Science and Healthcare team at Berkeley Canada. Thank you to LSO for the invite and opportunity to tell you a little more about Berkeley Canada this morning. We've been corporate members of LSO. If you can go back, well, leave it there, Brian, that's a good spot. We've been corporate members of LSO since 2015, and a few of my team have even been individual members for roughly 20 years, back when the organization was the Toronto Biotech Initiative. I actually used to help organize their pub nights well before they became the success that they are now. Thank you to Andrew. So Berkeley Canada is a specialty insurance company with offices in Toronto and Montreal, and are one of, if not the leading life science and healthcare insurers in Canada. I personally have a degree in biochemistry and with a specialization in biotechnology from the University of Waterloo. After graduating, I joined the insurance industry and quickly realized that there was an opportunity for science grads to excel in the insurance industry. And I was surprised at how few science grads consider a career in insurance. Now insurance, I'm sure everyone woke up this morning excited to hear about insurance, so I'll try to make it as exciting as possible. For those very unfamiliar with commercial or business insurance, I wanted to share this slide, which is very simplistic sort of view of the insurance market. The insured is the life science company, and in order to buy insurance, they typically have to work with a broker who sources quotes from several insurance companies like Berkeley. So we, as an insurance company, can only sell our products through a broker, and we and the broker end up working together to sell the best insurance solution for our customers. Next slide, Brian. For some additional context, here are some of the common names of those involved in the life science sector in Canada, both insurance companies and brokers that have some sort of a specialization in life sciences. Next one. I figured this question would be a good way to provide better context around how insurance fits into the life science sector. So why life science companies need insurance? Let me share some newspaper headlines from the past few years in order to answer that question. Next one. 2 patients who were injured by Medtronic's controversial infused bone graft product will receive a combined $8.5 million in settlements. And this is a great example of why companies buy product liability insurance. My team's main focus and where most of our time is spent is on underwriting product liability, which is the risk associated with our clients' products injuring the product users. Next one. Zucara Therapeutics suspends drug trial after new patient death. An example of clinical trial liability, which is typically a subset of product liability, the same concept, just specific to the risk of the product injuring those that are using the product during a clinical trial. Next one. Zucara Therapeutics and its CEO are being named in a lawsuit over whether the company misled investors about the death of a patient in a trial. An example of directors and officers liability. And I'm sorry to pick on Juno. This was just a great example of one issue potentially impacting more than one insurance policy. In this case, a clinical trial issue in turn led to a D&O claim. How a company manages an issue and what they disclose publicly can have a significant exposure associated with it, especially for publicly traded companies. Next one. 2 killed, 19 injured in Neptune Technologies Sherbrooke factory explosion. An example of general liability and property insurance. The property coverage is fairly straightforward in that a company would insure their physical building, equipment, and stock This gets a little more specialized for life science companies when trying to ensure research and development property, as there is a meaningful increase in value to certain research over time. The general liability coverage we think of as being more of a common coverage, not overly specific to life science companies, regularly referred to as a slip and fall policy, in that this coverage relates to the risk of a third party getting injured or having their property damaged as a result of the negligence of a company. Next one. Sell side lines up cash to fund its $50 million suit against CRO partner Inventive Health. I mean, an example of professional liability. Anytime someone provides services to a third party, they have the risk that their client could suffer a financial loss as a result of relying on their expertise or services to their detriment. This coverage is common for contract manufacturers, clinical research organizations, regulatory consultants, really anyone who provides a service to a third party. Next one. Banner Health sued over cyber attack exposing 3.7 million patient records. I mean, cyber liability insurance is a growing niche within the insurance sector. It's ultimately intended to protect businesses from internet-based risk, and more generally from risks relating to information technology infrastructure, information privacy, and information governance liability. Next one. 110 million gender discrimination lawsuit filed that claims a division of Novartis has routinely denied female employees equal pay and promotional opportunities. You know, great example of employment practices liability coverage that protects businesses against claims by workers that their legal rights as employees of the company have been violated, including claims of sexual harassment and discrimination. I mean, all of these are just a few types of sort of examples that life science companies face and that there are insurance solutions to address. My hope is that this will get you thinking about where we, as an insurance company, fit within the life science sector. Next one. So this is what we do, ultimately. Through a network of brokers, we work with life science and healthcare companies of all sizes, from small startup R&D companies spinning out of our local universities and hospitals to large international companies with hundreds of millions in revenue. We offer a wide variety of different types of insurance products specifically designed for life science companies. We're ultimately in the risk business, in that for a premium, we accept many different types of risk from our customers. Next slide. Berkeley Canada has 65 employees with offices in Toronto and Montreal, which includes our life science and healthcare team of 5. In addition to LSO, Berkeley Canada is also corporate members of Life Sciences BC, Bio Alberta, and the Biosciences Association of Manitoba. And we've been corporate sponsors of the Bloom Burton Healthcare Investor Conference since 2016. None of our competitors are engaged in the life science sector to the same extent that we are. Next slide. Berkeley Canada is one of roughly 60 separate operating companies that make up the W.R. Berkley Corporation, which is an A+ rated Fortune 500 publicly traded company with over $8 billion in revenues. People joke that it's the largest insurance company you've never heard of, which is a result of their decentralized approach, where they allow each of their separate operating companies to operate independently and tailor their respective offerings to their local environment, many of which have their own name and are not branded as Berkeley, which is why the Berkeley name isn't more commonly known. Berkeley Life Sciences, one of our sister companies, is a team of 80 people in the US that focus exclusively on providing insurance solutions to the US life science industry. They are one of the leading life science insurers in the world and are an extremely valuable resource for my team here in Canada. How does Berkeley Canada compete? I mean, this is the main question. I mean, we ultimately provide the financial security to our clients that comes with transferring their risk to and relying upon an A+ rated, publicly traded company, but the flexibility that comes with being a much smaller, more nimble Canadian domiciled insurance company. We make all of our own underwriting decisions in Canada and make all claims decisions in Canada. In comparison, our competitors are either a branch office of a US insurance company or represent a London-based insurance company that transacts business in Canada. In both of those scenarios, in order to truly tailor coverage or pay a large claim, the decision has to be referred to someone in the US or in England, which regularly takes weeks or months to be able to make the same decision that we can make locally in minutes. I had previously mentioned Berkeley Canada's engagement within the life science sector in Canada specifically as being a differentiator. However, we also differentiate based on our life science specific expertise. We've taken a completely different approach than our competitors in that instead of trying to teach someone with insurance experience how to evaluate and underwrite a life science company, We exclusively hire people with science backgrounds or degrees. We think it's easier to teach our staff insurance as opposed to teaching them a science degree. On this note, we're regularly looking for science grads that are interested in applying their learning in a business environment. Next slide. As far as the impact of the pandemic itself on the insurance industry, I mean, the industry as a whole has been far less impacted than most other industries. Insurance companies and brokerages pivoted quickly to working remotely, and there was little to no impact with respect to job security or productivity. With respect to my life science and healthcare team, it's been a challenging 15 months in trying to manage the risks associated with many of our clients pivoting their operations in response to the pandemic. While it was impressive to see the response from Canadian companies who stepped up to meet the needs of Canadians from an insurance perspective, there was a significant increase in risk associated with companies manufacturing products beyond the scope of their expertise. A couple of examples would be alcohol manufacturers producing sanitizer, or auto parts manufacturers producing ventilators. In the pandemic, and still is, there was also a significant business opportunity to anyone who could source or manufacture PPE. And in turn, we saw a significant number of product recalls of masks that didn't meet the required specifications, or sanitizers that were made with improper ingredients. I mean, it hasn't all been negative though, as while my team faced numerous challenges, we also had a front row seat to witness and evaluate some tremendous innovation within the diagnostic device and vaccine development areas. For those that aren't overly familiar with commercial insurance, I wanted to share a final thought. The pandemic has reminded me of how much of the business world, including the life science industry, revolves around insurance. Typically, insurance is an afterthought, or sometimes not thought about at all. However, for every clinical trial done on a new COVID vaccine, or every COVID test developed, or even every mask that you put on and relied upon to keep you safe, there was an insurance company like Berkeley, accepting the risk associated with those products not working as intended. Next slide. I'll now open it up for questions, along with sharing my contact info should anyone want to reach out directly after the fact. And as a final takeaway, make sure to simply ask your broker to include a quote from Berkeley Canada the next time you renew your insurance. I'll pass it back to you, Allison. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Liam, and I apologize to everybody. I should have reminded you that you can put questions in the Q&A. I did put that in the chat, so please. Maybe, Liam, I'll just ask one question about scalability in terms, and I think you touched on this, but you know, the life science industry has the tiny little companies to the medium size, and of course the very large ones who probably don't think of insurance necessarily as an afterthought. But really, could you speak to a little bit about that in terms of companies where, like, pre-commercial versus a commercial entity, and where they and how Berkeley sees those companies, maybe?
Absolutely, that's a great question, Allison. Thank you for that. You know, over my career, I spent a lot of time working, I mean, even at the tech transfer level, meeting with researchers who are trying to figure out the insurance piece. And based on that sort of appreciation for where they're at and the coverages that they need then, I mean, typically a company that's just starting out, all they need is a general liability policy to meet their leasing requirements. So they can ultimately buy that policy anywhere. It's not specific to a life science company or life science insurer. The way that we've approached that, I mean, we would sell them that policy, except that we would sell them that policy as part of a larger scalable insurance policy, so that they can then simply at any point in their life cycle endorse on the next coverages. So they keep the same coverage they have, but when they start their clinical trial, we endorse on a clinical trial liability coverage to that policy, or they want to start providing services to a third party, we endorse on the professional liability. So we've purposely tailored our life science policy to be scalable, to work with these companies from sort of infancy until commercialization, so that we can grow with them. Sort of a different approach, again, than a lot of our competitors that would just cancel a policy and have to sell a different one once they get to another sort of a different part of their life cycle ultimately. Right.
Great.
The other piece, just to add to that, is the directors and officers liability piece is outside of sort of the life science piece, and that would be the other coverage that as soon as a startup company is looking to add members to their board of directors, they typically then need to buy the directors and officers liability policy as well. So it would be another early stage coverage to consider.
Great, thank you very much, Liam. And I'll remind everybody that we do have some networking afterwards. So take Liam's information here if you want to get a hold of him, but I'm sure that there'll be opportunity to network as well. So thank you, Liam. And we'll move on to our next company. And our next company is Fero International Inc. And Sabrina is going to talk to us about that company, her company. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Hi, my name is Sabrina Fiorellino. I'm the CEO of Fero International. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you to the LSO team for having me. I want to start by showing everyone a video on Fero about what we do. We fundamentally understood that COVID was affecting the healthcare system, both on the long-term care side and the hospital side. So we wanted to create space, and not just beds in a box, but space that could save lives for people who were otherwise at risk.
And we've come up with and developed a mobile medical module. Tremendous amount of engineering went into the air handling system that we have. A lot of it was proprietary to the way we had to design it to fit in the smallest amount of space.
So it's a very flexible way of creating what could be an entire hospital outside a hospital, both an intensive care unit, an isolation unit, a long-term care facility unit if you wanted, and an operating space.
Having an ability to rapidly expand both urban and remote setting capacity for intensive care units, and also going a level above by being able to make these units negative pressure, which means that if you have deployed certain units as operating rooms, as an example, because you've got a mass casualty event, but after you've gone through all your surgeries and you actually need intensive care units that are negative pressure to care for those patients who have survived those operations, you just turn the switch and all of a sudden you've got a negative pressure ICU room. There's no other solution that has that kind of flexibility on the ground to actually adjust to changing needs. Compared to a traditional hospital facility, as a doctor, I feel that this facility provides us with everything that we need.
Is there anything lacking in this design, construction? No, I want one.
We can go to the next slide. Thank you for that. So what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about what I think is possible as a startup in Canada. I often hear from a lot of entrepreneurs, very difficult to get off the ground in Canada. Despite that, I wanted to talk about what Fero's been able to achieve in less than a year. I think from the video, you understand that we believe in creating unique solutions without limits. So what we do is, instead of trying to fit people with varying care requirements into pre-existing structures or rooms, we build mobile units around changing needs of a patient that are sustainable and that can be delivered globally. Currently, to date, we've submitted over 100 million in global government tenders. We're currently negotiating with various foreign governments regarding delivery of units, and not just ICUs for surge capacity, but extra beds for varying patient needs, long-term care facilities, surgical rooms for surgical backlogs. We're currently negotiating with large mining clients for health infrastructure and sporting teams to put these facilities on fields and on other sites in order to deal with concussion protocol and similar things. We're currently in the process of forming new global collaborations, and those are growing daily. We're entering into reseller agreements in Mexico, the Caribbean, Japan, and Canada. We've currently filed 12 patents and we've developed 4 new and improved products. And we're always looking towards R&D and filing more and more patents. We're also in the process of developing a software system. We've also expanded our products. We realize that our solution creates a system of safe indoor air. We're able to achieve up to 30 air exchanges in our units. And by decentralizing HVAC, there's no cross-contamination of air between rooms. And because of that, we realize that COVID taught us something that we didn't know before, which is safe indoor air is extremely important in times of droplet or airborne outbreak. And so we've applied our safe air handling system to other types of infrastructure. We've conducted a review of UNDP sustainability goals and have a focus on ESG and have achieved a number of UNDP ESG goals. We've hired a number of employees now, began paying salaries, and we completed our first investor conference. We presented at the Bloom Burton Healthcare Investor Conference earlier this year. Next, please. This is just a snapshot of some of the contracts we've submitted. You can see we go anywhere from a large Canadian hospital to global government tenders to modular housing projects to Mexican government operating rooms, and more coming out. There's tenders for containerized solutions like ours for NATO and NASA, and we're working hard to continue our pipeline. Next slide, please. We've also worked on global market expansion. We've done that through creating partners and pilot projects. We work very closely with UHN, who tested our units in early days. We work with Draeger. I'm sure a lot of you know who they are. Fujifilm, Giant, which is one of the largest container home builders in the world, and Trident Brands, which is a nutraceutical company. We've already incorporated our U.S. subsidiary. We're working with Enterprise Florida on government incentives to manufacture also in Florida. We're working on a pilot in South Africa with Draeger and a reseller agreement with Draeger Australia. Next, please. This is just to show what's possible with our units. We believe what we've created is Lego for humans. It allows us to scale up and scale down on a bed-by-bed basis. This is a full hospital solution using our containerized rooms, and you can see how it could be easy to add and remove as required. Next, please. These are adjacent verticals we moved into and have applied our technology to. We have a special advisor to our board of directors, Major General David Fraser on the military side. Obviously, we have a very robust hospital medical advisory board that also has doctors from UHN and other surrounding hospitals. We've applied our system to schools to create safe indoor air within schools, long-term care facilities, and even laboratories with a shortage of laboratory space. Next, please. We've also created other verticals by servicing. So we're able to service and maintain our units, train people how to use them, deliver them, store them ongoing, install them. And we're working on a software solution that allows one doctor to triage over 100 ICU patients. We also have a high definition audio video system in our units that would allow a doctor in Toronto, as an example, to consult with a doctor in Nepal or a doctor in an Indigenous community where there's difficult cases. Next, please. Obviously, ESG is a buzzword today. Fero's been dedicated to ESG from the very beginning. We're currently meeting 5 of the UNDP sustainability goals, and we're working on another 5. Very important to us. It's been important to us from the beginning, and we always ask our investors which of these goals are important to them. Next, please. We've had a lot of news and media coverage since we started, and we continue to do that. We're starting to get more and more international coverage and international interest. Next, please. And here's our roadmap for growth. I won't go into it in extreme detail, but we met all our 2020 goals. We're working on, for 2021, completing our international patent filings, deploying a number of solutions, expanding our relationships. We're also looking to acquire a 300,000 square foot facility and a manufacturer so that the company can continue to expand. Next, please. Any questions? I wanted to keep it short so I could interact with you.
Thank you. Thank you Sabrina. As a reminder again to put questions in the Q&A. I have a couple of questions. One is, how as a company have you thought about, I mean, your amazing technology can be used in a multitude of areas, if you've shown. So how as a company have you kind of managed that? Because that can be a plus, but it can also be a minus because you can end up being scattered. So how have you managed that as a company?
Sure. So our technology is the same across the verticals. It's the interior finishes that change. And so the interior finishes for us are really the simple part. And so it's been easy because we create Lego, what we call Lego. So the Lego block with the high-tech portion remains the same across all sectors except hospital, where we run oxygen suction and med gas lines, which is an add, which makes, you know, the build obviously slightly more complicated. But across all the other sectors, the build is the same, but for the interior finishes. And so we've created that system exactly for the reason you said, so we wouldn't be scattered, that we're just working on interior finishes, you know, sector by sector.
Right. And a question about the sustainability goals. So I was really pleased to see that myself. How important, so it's been important to your company as a value to the company, as an internal value, but how important is it to the investors? Do you find it resonates with investors or other countries, for example, when you're trying to go out and sell your solutions?
I think it's more and more important. I think we see a shift towards sustainability in general. I think COVID has also pushed us in that direction, has shown us what happens when we retract from overusing the environment in some ways. And so I think more and more investors have specific funds that relate only to sustainability. And we're seeing a lot more demand for that. Our team also is, our management team is 50% female, and we have 30% female and minority representation on the board. And we're working on a subsidiary that's 51% Indigenous owned. So I think these things are becoming more and more important to investors, and not just us.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We have a question about congratulations on your amazing innovations, but also curious about the sustainability and affordability of a solution in a developing country.
Absolutely. This is part of why we wanted to do this. So our units, because we start either with a shipping container or a custom enclosure, they're meant to last 30, 40, 50 years. Because of the way we build, they can be retrofitted very easily. And so a typical ICU bricks and mortar room costs between $1 million and $2 million USD to build. We sell our solutions for 200,000 Canadian dollars, but we exceed North American building code standards for hospital.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much, Sabrina. I'm sure you're going to get lots of questions later or discussion. It's quite exciting to see such a company just kind of emerge and be so exciting going forward. So thank you very much for presenting.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you.
So our next company to present is Paula, and Paula's coming to us from PR Associates. So I'll just wait for her face to pop up on the screen, and then I'll step out. There you go, Paula.
Thank you so much, Alison. I really appreciate it. And if we could go to, there we are. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining. Thank you, LSO, for inviting me. And I've loved the presentation so far. So thank you again. We can go to the next slide. PR Associates is a public relations firm. But how we're different is all in our tagline, prepared to be noticed. And we find this extremely important in the last 18 months as we've seen the life science sector really gain this momentum, well-deserved momentum due to COVID. And really we take what is science and translate it to the specific audience. So that's how we're different. We're niche in the sciences sector, from the life science industry to natural resources, mining, technology, etc. And we're all about communications and working with world-class organizations from inception all the way to large scale. And if we can go to the next slide, please. This is our team. To us, it's all about the people. We're so proud to work with so many great organizations, but we are a boutique firm that does a lot, and we have some key team members that are highly specialized. Our founder, president, CEO is Robert Simpson, who's been in the public relations, science communication expertise in industry for over 20 years. And then we have a diverse group of writers, account directors, government relations, etc. Next slide, please. Thank you. And as I mentioned, it is really the science of communication. So not only is the industry so pivotal in explaining their research, their findings, whether it be to the general public, the investor audience, whatever it may be, you really need to develop a plan of action. And I'll talk about that later. But where we specialize pertaining to the life sciences sector is strategic communications. And that can go to issues management as well, crisis communications, media and government relations, influencer relations. And then we also provide communications and media training, especially for our company spokespeople as they're growing and getting that recognition in the media to be able to speak clearly to journalists, reporters, etc. Next slide, please. Before we go further, for every company, it's all about the plan and then the tactics for public relations and communications. And this is so important. Next slide, please. These are some of our industry clients, and I'm sure you'll recognize a few of them. I know Admari is also a sponsor with LSO, so we're so proud to work with them as well. But these companies mean a lot to us because they are transcending what science is to their audiences and the general public. And most recently, we've worked with Mount Sinai with Dr. Ivan Barazzi, who is a researcher there in some media relations work for his findings in COVID. And we were approached by 60 Minutes. So we're working on a story that's pending to come out of Brazil. Next slide, please. Most of you may recognize Karima Esavar. We not only work with her for Fork Ventures, the company that she's a partner in and CEO. She is also the chair Health and Biosciences Economic Strategy Table for the Government of Canada. So she's really been out there in the last 2 years talking and so passionately speaking about the sector and the need for government support. And so where we help her specifically is around thought leadership, making sure she's a part of those important conversations. We have helped her acquire stories with the Globe and Mail and the Hills Times, various other publications with interviews and op-editorials, which we handle from planning, draft stage, idea creation, all the way to submission. We talked previously about strategic communications, which is vital depending on the objective and the audience. We also provide advisory services, and we support her on various levels of her social media. So she gets out there and is noticed from not only a Canadian perspective, but a global perspective. Next slide, please. Sorry, I know there's a ton of text here. I recommend everyone go to prassociates.com to learn more about our case studies. I just wanted to give a quick snapshot here on some of the work we did for Admari. They developed, they needed an evaluation, and then looking at their brand, how to develop a communications strategy and approach for the organization. And we talked about target audiences, and this is exactly the task that was put to us because they needed a new brand identity after being in operation in the sector for over 10 years. So not only did we develop the strategy, we put together the communication tactics and the marketing and communications plan for them. And depending on the stage your company is in, we can handle all of the work or work collaboratively with your team internally that are in marketing and communications to complement. And this is where a lot of clients come to us for support as well, a lot of the mid-size and larger size clients. And so really is that we were able to use this important information to then create social media videos, press releases, story pitching to the media, using innovative ideas, and then identifying speaker opportunities for their C-suite. And for example, their CEO, Gordon McCauley, having him be part of these conversations with high-profile media. Next slide, please. The next one is NZ Technologies. They are a very innovative firm out of Vancouver. And by the way, PR Associates is national across Canada. I'm in Vancouver, and then our CEO is in Ottawa, and we cover all across with our team. And so really, I wanted to take a look from when we look at someone like Mari, who has really grown and made their mark over the last decade in the sector. NZ Technologies is really starting out, and the situation with them is they took advantage of the pivot COVID-19 brought and went out of the surgical operating room and into the mainstream. And what they developed was a touchless navigation technology, and they put that in elevators. And so from that and the media relations we were able to acquire around the story that they had worked with Ronald McDonald House. And of course, you can imagine the patients, the parents were very, very worried, as well as was Ronald McDonald House with COVID-19. And you don't even want to know how many germs are on an elevator button, let me tell you. And so with NZ Technologies hovertop technology, you can just kind of guide your hand, finger over top of where you want to go, and the elevator will take you there. Well, because of our media relations efforts, we were aired over 35 times in Canada and the US, reaching more than 19 million people, not only within Canada, but also Washington. And now they have some great successes, and they've got some new contracts in place. So really, this is our goal. And this brings up a great example is public relations has to align with your business objectives. And whatever that outcome needs to be, we want to support it. Next slide, please. I want to thank you again for the opportunity. As I mentioned, it's all in our tagline, prepare to be noticed. We help companies get noticed when and where it matters most. We are a proud partner of Life Sciences Ontario. I really enjoy working in the sector to make a difference and specialize in that science communication. So we understand the various needs, the government relations, the challenges the sector may face in getting your message across, be it again to the general public, to investors, or government. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you, Paula. So maybe I'll ask just a quick question about so we live in a world of lots of communication. And so do you find that you have to spend a lot of time with PR, with your job, working on the miscommunication of science? Or do you feel that if you can start at the beginning with a company to develop the right story, it's less of a problem? I mean, miscommunication of what's going on, COVID's a perfect example,
yes,
is quite an issue these days. So how does your company feel fit in there?
Oh, what a great question, Alison. Is you really outlined that well. If we can start at the beginning, it's all about telling your story in a way that resonates, but telling it effectively. And you said that it's all about communication, but the difference between general communication and effective communication is vast. And so with the miscommunication, as you mentioned, with COVID as an example, everyone became a scientist by their own accord, right? Everyone all of a sudden had a PhD and became a scientist just because of what they read on the internet. With that is that we want to make sure we develop a communications foundation for our clients and our partner companies so that this lasts for years, that they can adapt and build on, because it's very difficult if a company's messages gets lost in translation to try to correct it after the fact. And really, our key advantage is to be able to take a look at the company's entire communications and marketing strategy and then hone in on those key messages and that story to not be convoluted, to be clear, concise, and really elevate that company.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. I'm sure people will be wanting to chat with you after as well. So I think given the time, I'm going to move to our last company, but thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And so our final presentation is from Zucara Therapeutics. And one of the things you'll notice, and this is deliberate on our thinking about the member marathon, is to talk about companies from across the spectrum of life science. And so here we have pharma, a small pharma company, I would say, starting, although has had a huge amount of success just recently. And so I'd like to introduce Michael to talk about Sakura Therapeutics.
Thanks, Allison. It's nice to see you again, and thanks to LSO for inviting me to the member marathon. It was really interesting to hear the presentations from Berkeley and PR Associates, because we've both interacted with them. Berkeley, through a broker they use, Marsh, has provided our general liability, D&O, and also now clinical trial insurance, and PR Associates has helped us through one of our institutions, MRA. So we're all working together. It's such a small and healthy community. So Zucara is based in Toronto. We do have some folks out in Vancouver, so we cross Canada. We're focused on diabetes. We're a clinical company now, and the first to develop a therapy to prevent hypoglycemia or low blood sugar in people that are taking insulin for their diabetes. And here's a quote from someone spoken to, that these overnight lows, the low blood sugar events, are really among the worst. And outside of a cure for diabetes, this would be the next best thing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our story through the next slide, which shows the history of Zucara, and it dates all the way back to the discovery of insulin. And some of you may know that we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the discovery of insulin by Banting and Best and McLeod in 1921. And that went on to promote a lot of academic interest in diabetes. And one of our founding academics, Dr. Mladen Francis, the last postdoc in Charles Best's lab, and he went on to have a large lab of people. And the last postdoc in his lab, Dr. Michael Riddell, we continue to collaborate with. He started his work at U of T, and he's now at York University. In 2014, they, along with our CSO, Richard Liggins and David Coy, created Zucara through founding institutions TIAP, who you may know out of Toronto, and Admare out of Vancouver. And so this has really led a lot of interest out of the discovery of insulin into other therapeutics that could help diabetic patients. And on this slide, you see really what happened a day of life of someone with type 1 or type 2 diabetes that are taking insulin. And they have many highs that are really what needs to be controlled, that high blood sugar that we need to hear about trying to lower. But when they're taking insulin, it results in these lows as well. And they're called hypoglycemic events. They can be very disruptive They can make you feel just horrible. You sweat, you start to shake, and particularly overnight, there's not much you can do about it. In rare circumstances, you're found dead in bed in the morning, and that results in a lot of fear, a fear of having these lows throughout the day or the night. And if you're a parent and you have a child with type 1 diabetes, it's a constant concern of whether they're going to go low. The high are of a concern for longer health issues. What we're finding is that this oscillation between high and low is not good for you over long term. On the next slide, you can see that over 40 years, there are many mild hypoglycemic events, and they can be more severe, more moderate, but then they lead to these severe hypoglycemic events where you're rushed in an ambulance to the hospital, or you end up crashing your car or fainting. And that increases your chance of having cardiovascular disease or fatality. And we're learning more and more about this high and low constant changes that are happening and what that does to longer term health. On the next slide, you see okay, here we go. Some of the solutions that are being provided for people that have hypoglycemia. So glucagon is actually opposite of insulin. So glucagon raises your blood sugar when you go low. And for those people that have those severe hypoglycemic events, they can take a rescue form of glucagon. And for many years, it was a very common injection, but now it's been formulated to be much easier to use. Through the chair of our board, a company called Leucemia developed a nasal administration, and that's being marketed now by Eli Lilly. And Zealand and come up with their own injectable solutions of glucagon. Insulins have gotten better over the years in preventing hypoglycemic events, but that's their job, is really to lower that blood sugar, and so that continues to happen. And then there's been a lot of development around technology. So you might have seen commercials for Dexcom. Nick Jonas has been on commercials resulting in people to do that finger blood prick anymore, or Freestyle, which is an product, is often seen. And then what is being tried now is to get insulin and glucagon into a dual hormone pump, which would be considered like an artificial pancreas. And so technology development has helped. And in fact, from our market research, people that are on these CGMs are the highest interest in using a drug like Zucara's, because they're going low and then they want a solution to prevent those lows from occurring. On the next slide, we're focused our target product profile on nighttime use. That's when people are the most worried. About half of the events occur overnight. And our drug would be initially formulated as a nightly injection. When you're taking your insulin at night, you would also take an injection of ZTO1, the drug that's in development, and those overnight hypoglycemic events. We're thinking about possibly co-formulating it with insulin, so you just take one injection at night, or perhaps making an oral or longer lasting version that you might take only weekly or over a longer period of time. And that would give the people a sense of ease to get through the night, to not have these lows, to wake up in a fright and a sweat, and go about their days feeling good, and over time, time in range. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the biology. So in the pancreas, be aware that there are the beta cells and they produce insulin. And in type 1 diabetes, and then people who progress with type 2 diabetes, those beta cells are eventually destroyed. It's an autoimmune attack on those beta cells. And because those are destroyed, they disrupt the communication between the other main cells of the islet, which are the alpha cells and the delta cell. The alpha cells produce glucagon. They remain intact over the life of a diabetic, as do the delta cells that release somatostatin. And so back to our history, Mladen Vranic, Michael Riddell, and the other founders discovered that because those beta cells are gone, it disrupts the regulation between three cells. Somatostatin is overexpressed and dysregulated and keeps the brakes on this alpha cell from releasing glucagon when you go low. And so we've developed ZT01, which is a very specific antagonist to a receptor, SSTR2, on the alpha cell, and it takes the brake to allow glucagon to be released when you go low. And then that should come back up, and that sugar itself, once it gets to a normal range, negatively feedbacks on the alpha cell to not release too much glucagon. So essentially, you would take your insulin throughout the day, you'd have ZT01 around, so if you went low, it would turn on that alpha cell, bring that sugar back up, and prevent lows from occurring. And so what we're doing is testing that in the clinic now. On the next slide, you can see here a projection of our clinical trial development. We just announced a couple weeks ago a successful completion of the single ascending dose and multiple ascending dose clinical trials for healthy volunteers and also type 1 diabetics. The drug is shown to be safe and tolerated, and has allowed us to pick the doses that we will take forward into a hypoglycemic clamp study. And that's really a challenge. So we'll be taking type 1 diabetics into hypoglycemia very safely and carefully and see whether pre-administration of our drug causes this glucagon response and proves our mechanism of action. And we've done several of these studies already at a preclinical level. We expect to get top-line data in the new year, and that would inform the phase 2 development, which would address the course of a month to bed, we can reduce those hypoglycemic events while you're sleeping. The final slide here is just a snapshot of where we've gone over the last several years. We've received around $2 million in seed funding from various different institutions here and investors. And that has allowed us to secure meaningful money to get through those preclinical studies to start phase 1 from the Helmsley Charitable Trust and JDRF that have been huge supporters trying to find solutions for people with diabetes. As we were getting closer and closer to the clinic, we were able to attract larger venture capital funding, and particularly a multi-billion-dollar fund out of the US called Perceptive Advisors through their venture fund, the Perceptive's Ontogeny Venture Fund, and that's allowed us to secure $21 million of funding to get through phase 1, and successful phase 1 get all the way to the phase 2. And so we're very excited to move ZT01 forward, targeting a high unmet medical need for people. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And thanks for listening to the presentation.
Thanks, Michael. So Allison, unfortunately, is going to have to drop off at 10 o'clock. So I am jumping on here to ask you some questions and moderate just the closeout of the session. This is a great presentation and so timely, given that we are at the 100th anniversary of insulin. And I really liked you walking through that history and that connectivity right back to Drs. Banting and Best. We have a question from Anne in terms of how does the ZT01 therapy compare to insulin pumps for regulating blood sugars?
That's a really good question. So insulin pumps are essentially a pump with insulin, as well as continuous glucose monitor that talk to each other, and they tell you when you should have insulin being used as you've eaten something or you're taking in sugar. And insulin, just like injection, now it's being delivered in. However, we're on the other side of it, so we're trying to protect from those lows, so we're promoting glucagon. So ZT01 would be balance that pump or balance that in insulin very much the same way. They're trying to get insulin and glucagon together in the same pump. That's a dual hormone pump, and that's being worked now. And ZTO1 really acts to turn glucagon on in the pancreas. So we've thought about potentially putting ZTO1 in a pump instead of glucagon, and that's where we may go. So this technology is just trying to make it easier for people. However, biology is very much the same. Insulin brings your sugar to be used. ZTO1 allows glucagon to increase that sugar when it becomes low.
Thanks, Mike. We have one more question in the chat here, and this question is really about real-time detection technologies like those of Dexcom and Abbott. Do you see those as the future of diabetic therapies being connected in with those real-time detection technologies?
Yeah, I certainly see the market going in that direction. A lot more people are getting on CGMs, and it's helping them. It's telling them when they're high, telling them when they're low, and then getting low, what to do about it. Dexcom and Abbott Libre and Medtronic are all leading the way. So I think a lot more people are going to go on those. There's not universal reimbursement yet for it. So as it becomes more affordable for people, then they'll go on them. And as I mentioned before, once people see those lows happening, you can kind of react. You can take in some sugar, some orange juice. You can't do that when you're sleeping, and you can't always time it in the right way. So having that protection of ZTO1 around so you don't have to think about it and just allows for that normal biology to be restored is something that we think will still be compelling for people.
Oh, very exciting technology, Michael, and continues our long history of creating solutions for diabetics globally. So well done, terrific presentation, and certainly we'll be keeping an eye on Zucara in the near future. So thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everyone.
Brian, if you could pull up our closing slides. A couple quick announcements. We do have our awards presentation Thursday, October 14th, so please mark your calendars for that. We're hopeful that if things continue in a positive direction, we might even be able to have an in-person event. So fingers crossed on that one. Our upcoming webinar series, we have a special session next Tuesday, June 22nd at 1 p.m. This is around unlocking talent acquisition potential and utilizing university co-op and industry-supported initiatives to help build your team. We also have another special event the following Thursday. It's an LSO vaccine and healthcare access webinar. We've seen during the COVID pandemic has highlighted inequities in the access to healthcare, and we've seen that through vaccine distribution. We're going to have some experts from across the province speaking about the impacts to some vulnerable communities. This should be a really interesting session. And we have another session in July on psychedelics. This is sort of a topic that's really gaining a lot of steam. It's kind of like where medical cannabis was, 5-10 years ago, and we're now starting to see new technologies emerge with psychedelics. So that should be a very interesting session as well. Next slide. Finally, a thanks to all of our sponsors, our platinum sponsors seen here. Our gold sponsors, which includes Mary, which you heard about today as well. And our silver sponsors. And really, we thank all of our sponsors and our members. We wouldn't be able to run these sorts of events without their support. And finally, I just want to thank you all for attending. And I think we're going to pop back into the floor plan of Remo. So you can stick around and you can network if you have some time to do so. Thank you very much, everyone.